a song in my heart, the story of men and their music, of composers who really had a song in their heart. What a great old song, and from what a grand old show, Our Miss Gibbs. Surely one of the loveliest musical comedies ever written. It represents the cream of light music and was written by Lionel Monckton. Better known as Lally to his intimates, Monckton was possibly England's greatest composer of musical comedy of this century. Yes, I'm not overlooking Paul Rubens, Noel Coward, or Ivan Novello. They represent the best in their sphere. But when it comes to Lionel Monckton, well, let's tell the story.
Monckton? Well, surely you don't have to tell the story of Monckton. Why, he's part of the British theatre of the 20th century.
No overstatement, old boy. But there were others.
Undoubtedly, undoubtedly. But there was only one Monckton. He came along with George Edwards, the first George Edwards.
That's just why I want to discuss him and his work. So, for a start, let's get this right. An Englishman, he was born in 1862. But unlike a lot of other composers we've dealt with, he didn't have to come up the hard way. No, his people had money. And after a university course, he was destined for a professional career. But at that time in England...
This music of Arthur Sullivan, why, it's positively scintillating.
And those lyrics of his collaborator, W.S. Gilbert.
Oh, I think they're simply divine.
Which was exactly the kind of chatter young Monckton was bred on. Is it any wonder that with a God-given talent for music, he later blossomed forth with melodies that were as exhilarating as a summer breeze? Such a melody was his charming song Under the Deodar from the musical comedy The Country Girl.
Over the mountain passes, under the peaks of snow, forest and lawn, close to the dawn, that is the land I know. Meadows of waving grasses, wonderful woods above, there would I be.
Lionel Monckton ever depended on charm. His music possessed lilt, warmth, plus that nostalgic something that is so very necessary in the equipment of a successful composer. That Dean of English critics, James Agate, Jimmy to his friends, once asked Monckton at London's famous Savage Club,
Lally, tell me, what decided you to write exclusively for the field of musical comedy?
Frankly, I don't know. Other than the fact I liked musical comedy.
Elucidating. But so do a lot of other people.
Well, possibly it was the music of Arthur Sullivan. Somehow or other, I received a greater thrill from the music and works of Gilbert and Sullivan than from any other combination. They wrote songs that seemed to stay in the memory.
I take it then that you're influenced by Sullivan, eh?
Of course. His operettas have always been a source of inspiration.
Which goes to prove you're a pretty good judge. Well, let me tell you, Lally, you're on the right track. Let's go down and have a noggin and discuss this subject at greater length. They tell me there's some very good proposals.
and there you have the basis of Monckton's inspiration. But get this correctly, he was no slavish imitator. He created and devised melodies that were essentially part of him. Instance, some of the lovely tunes he wrote in collaboration with Howard Talbot for that fine show, The Arcadians. Do you recall the enchanting little waltz from that production, The Girl with a Brogue?
Erin's a spot famous for greenery, but we do not match with our scenery. We're not so green, we can make hay with you, says the colleen. Ah, get away with you. Ah, no, stop your philandering, you can't capture the rogue. She heard your blarney from Clare to Killarney, the dear little girl with the bit of a brogue. Oh, no, stop your philandering, you can't capture the rogue. She heard your blarney from Clare to Killarney, the dear little girl with the bit of a brogue.
I must mention that that number was only one of the hits from that score. There were many others, such as The Pipes of Pan and Arcady is Ever Young. After the success of his earlier efforts, he of course became much sought after by theatrical producers. One day he was sent for by England's #1 showman, the great George Edwards.
Lally, you've composed a lot of fine tunes for my shows. As an entrepreneur, I'm eternally indebted to such writers as Franz Lehrer, Ivan Carroll, Paul Rubens, and of course, yourself. But for my next show, I want you to outshine all your previous efforts.
For you, Governor, I'd do anything.
Well, then, take a look at this libretto. I think it has immense possibilities. I'm calling it The Quaker Girl.
The Quaker Girl. Sounds like a typical Gaiety show.
It is, and it will be. Gertie Miller plays the lead, the name role. So, will you give it your all?
And how well did Monckton carry out this request? For it was twofold. He revered George Edwards as England's greatest theatrical producer. He loved Gertrude Miller, England's finest musical comedy star. You see, she was his wife. And so, to a memory of the Quaker Girl, that beautiful waltz, Come to the Ball.
Every tune is a
time, naturally enough, Monckton was world famous. His musical comedies achieved extraordinary renown. In fact, they're still regarded as classics of their kind to this very day. A famous English music publisher in this connection was once discussing music with a young American composer.
After hearing those tunes of yours, I feel certain that you'll go far. Even though at present you're still in the, what shall I say, the developmental stage.
You're very encouraging, sir.
But, and mind you, this is a big but. Although you possess an undoubted gift for melody, you must learn to develop style.
Perhaps, sir, you'd be good enough to give me a hint as to the direction I should work on to develop style.
Well, I can offer no better suggestion than that you should follow on the lines of Monckton's music. Go along to the Gaiety and listen to Gertie Miller singing his melodies in R.M.S. Gibbs.
Indeed, I will. And thank you very much, sir.
That young man happened to be an unknown composer named Jerome Kern. And he took the good advice proffered. He went right down to the Gaiety and wallowed in Monckton's R.M.S. Gibbs. One of the brighter songs from this show was, of course, Not That Kind of a Person.
I will confess that as a man you're all but my dear. I must admit to that my heart you almost would steal. I hope you won't consider I'm not over polite. You're pretty near the sort of man I want to, not quite. If you were just the sort of fellow I could admire, if you were just the model man a girl could desire, then we could have a giddy time at theatre and bar. But as it is, you're not that sort of person at all.
If I were just the sort of fellow she could admire, if I were just the model man a girl would desire, then we would have a giddy time at theatre and ball.
But as it is, you're not that sort of person at all.
Oh, is that so? If you were just the sort of girl that I could admire, if you had only got a modest million or more, then I next Saturday upon your father would call. But as it is, I don't intend to do so at all.
If I were just the sort of girl that he could adore, if I had only got a million or more, then he next Saturday upon my father would call.
But as it is, I don't intend to do so at all.
It was said of Jerome Kern that just as Monckton was influenced by the music of Sir Arthur Sullivan, so was Kern by the music of Monckton, which sounds very feasible. Whichever way one looks at it, these three composers achieved terrific distinction in the lighter sphere of music. Whilst Monckton, during his regime, was well in the public eye, his wife, Gertie Miller, possibly overshadowed him. She was undoubtedly the toast of London. She is still recalled as the best of all English musical comedy stars. But the fact remains, could she have achieved such success without her husband's melodies? As one dear old theatre-goer stated,
My dear, I've seen them all. Lily Elsie, Gertie Miller, Josie Collins, Peggy Wood, and Evelyn Leigh. But take it from me, Gertie Miller was the greatest of them all.
this, I think, calls for another Gertrude Miller song, which, of course, was a Monckton composition. The mercurial Moonstruck.
Moon, moon, mischief-making moon, what are you doing there? You seem like a fairy dream up in the midnight air. When I look at you, I always know you will shoot me with your silver bow. Just as soon as the daylight's gone, when it's then I feel a foolish sort of feeling coming on. I'm such a silly when the moon comes out. I hardly seem to know what I'm about. Skipping, hopping, never, never stopping. I can't keep still.
Despite the extraordinary success of the Gertrude Miller-Lionel Monckton combination, somehow or other it didn't quite work out from a matrimonial point of view. They were eventually to part.
Gertrude Miller. Gertie Miller. What became of her eventually?
Don't you remember, old man? She married Lord Dudley.
Lord Dudley? You mean the former Governor-General of Australia?
I do. And as the Countess of Dudley, this lovely person graced the English aristocracy with the same charm as she gave to her public in her earlier days over the footlights.
And what of Monckton?
He passed on in 1924.
Maybe. But although his song is ended, his melodies linger on. Who can ever forget the indescribable charm of his Quaker girl?
Quiet Quaker maid, from my babyhood I've been, for I never even played with the children on the green. But I used to sew and mend while my aunt was sitting near, till a little Quaker friend came and whispered in my ear. Thee loves me and me loves thee. Oh, he was a young mischief maker. Two little sweethearts we used to be. He was such a dear little Quaker. Quaker men do not know the way to woo. I have fancied now and then there are other men who do. If I meet with one of these, then it might be very nice when we walk beneath the trees. And he told me once or twice, thee loves me and I love thee, love's the only true marriage maker. Somebody's wife one day I will be, but not the little wife of a Quaker.
This century has given us some great writers of musical comedy.
Victor Herbert, Ivan Carroll, Paul Rubens, Sigmund Romberg.
Jerome Kern, Rudolph Frimmel, Cole Porter, Richard Rogers.
Yes, all great composers. But whenever these names come to mind, Lionel Monckton's must always be bracketed with them. You can't create a bunch of musicals like The Single E,
The Country Girl.
The Girls of Gothenburg.
The Quaker Girl, The Arcadian.
and of course Our Miss Gibbs, plus quite a few others, without the thought, this man was a composer. So we close our story with a reprise of two of his greatest melodies, Mary and Come to the Ball.
Mary, people call me Pretty Mary. I don't believe them, for they often tell me please. Mary is a girl that's not a fairy. I wish they wouldn't call me Mary when my name's Miss Gibbs.
Mary, we adore you, pretty Mary, so do believe us, oh, we never tell you please.
Tell me, please.
Mary, you're a perfect little Mary, we wish you'd let us call you Mary, oh, your name's Miss Gibbs.
Miss Gibbs, if you please.
Let us call you Mary, dear.
Miss Gibbs, if you please.
Say, will you come to the ball?
we bid farewell to still another composer who had a song in his heart, Lionel Monckton. The artists who helped revive recollections of his bygone era were Douglas Kelly, Michael Collins, George Randall, Moira Farrow, David Allen, Alan Eddy, Joan Arnold, and Dorothy Cathan. Your narrator was Kevin Brennan. The orchestra and vocal ensemble were under the baton of William Flynn. With a Song in My Heart was produced by Alfred Potter and scripted and directed by Jack O'Hagan.